Everyone, we're just going to look at the superolateral surface of the cerebral hemispheres. In this particular case, I'm holding the left cerebral hemisphere. You can see the frontal lobe with the frontal pole. You can see the parietal lobe in this region. You can see the occipital lobe with the occipital pole. You can see the temporal lobe with the temporal pole. So these are the big things. You'll see different arrangements of gyri on this surface. Some are more horizontally placed, like this one, like this one, like this one. So they are sort of horizontally placed. The others are either vertically or obliquely placed. So we'll have a look at all of them. I'll show you this one. This one is the right cerebral hemisphere, which is covered by the arachnoid and the pia, so you can see the two. And on this one, the gyri are close together. In the other one, they have sort of moved out because we have taken the arachnoid and the pia out of it. So they have sort of spliced. This one is okay, they are all together. And here, you can see the central sulcus, which comes down to this level, and the post-central sulcus on this side. Here is the lateral sulcus, the Sylvian fissure, so you can see that. And this is the temporal lobe. This is the occipital lobe. This one is the parieto-occipital sulcus between the occipital lobe and the parietal lobe. And this is the pre-occipital notch. If you join a line between these 2 points, then you separate the occipital lobe.
4 points you have to keep in your mind. The first point is there should be a fissure which is cutting the superomedial border. The superomedial border extending from the frontal pole to the occipital pole. ওই superomedial বর্ডারটা ধরে এই বর্ডারটার মিড পয়েন্টের হাফ ইঞ্চ পেছন দিকে there should be a fissure which should cut this border. First point, there are so many fissures cutting it. Mid point এ যাবে, half inch পেছন দিকে যাবে, and identify or locate a fissure which is cutting it. Second point, the fissure which is running along the superolateral surface cutting the superomedial border, that should be roughly at an angle of 70 degrees with the superomedial border. Third point, identify a fissure which not only cuts the superomedial border but also extends to the medial surface. There may be other fissures present along the superolateral surface which are not extending. Identify a fissure which is extending, crossing the superomedial border and extending to the medial surface of the cerebrum. Third point. Fourth point, along the superolateral surface, identify the same fissure which is going down but should not touch the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus. It should not intersect or go and touch the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus. তাহলে এইটা almost at the midpoint of the superomedial border. It should extend to the medial surface. It should roughly make an angle of 70 degrees and it should not touch the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus. এইখানে এতগুলো ফিশারের মধ্যে এবার পরীক্ষার সময় তোমাকে যদি জিজ্ঞেস করা হয়, you will say this one, examiner will say why are you showing this one, you may show this one, examiner will say why you are showing this one. তোমাকে এই 4টে পয়েন্ট মাথায় রেখে যে ফিশারটা is meeting all these 4 points, that one you have to identify, that one you have to say, and that one you have to justify by saying because it is meeting all the 4 points, that is why this is the central sulcus. এটা হচ্ছে central sulcus, এটা হচ্ছে posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus. বাকি যে stem আর অন্য যে দুটো এগুলো পরে দেখানো হবে. Base of the brainier medial surface, and these are the 2 gyri which are present in front and behind. Motor, primary sensory.
So what you can now see is this is where the lateral sulcus is sort of ending at this point. This has been cut. So it's about this point. And from here, Here's the parietal lobe, this region, central sulcus, post-central sulcus, and at this point where you see the lateral sulcus, you can see a small sulcus going up there, and there is this arrangement over that extension. So this is called the supramarginal gyrus, and this region is called the angular gyrus. This part. The angular, and this is the supramarginal. These are referred to as association areas, cortical association areas. Now if you look at the frontal lobe, you can see one horizontal sulcus and a second horizontal sulcus, which sort of subdivides the frontal lobe into three horizontal portions. So it's called the superior frontal gyrus, middle frontal gyrus, inferior frontal gyrus. Let's have a look at this one. So you can see the superior and the inferior sulci, which are subdividing the frontal lobe into a superior gyrus, a middle gyrus, and an inferior gyrus. If you look at the temporal lobe, and if I separate the temporal lobe from the parietal and frontal lobe, if I separate it, then there are parts of the parietal and the frontal which are being hidden by this region of the temporal lobe. So these hidden parts of the parietal lobe and the frontal lobe are called the opercular regions. And if you look at the temporal lobe on this side, on the superolateral surface, you see a superior sulcus and an inferior sulcus, which subdivides the temporal lobe into a superior temporal gyrus, middle temporal gyrus, inferior temporal gyrus. So these three can be seen. In the region of the frontal lobe, we can't see the extension here. From the lateral sulcus, there is an anterior part, superior part. This is the superior one. That's the anterior one. This part is called the orbital part, okay, of the frontal lobe, which belongs to the inferior frontal gyri. Okay, once I separate this, you can see a part of the cortex inside, which is hidden by the temporal lobe. It is in the opercular region. So once I open up the lateral sulcus, Sylvian fissure, the cortex that you see here is called the insular cortex, and the area is called the insula. Inside the insula, you have the extreme capsule, external capsule, and then you go to the basal nuclei, to the lentiform nucleus. So all of that is deep to this region. So because this is a separate entity which can be seen once you open this up, sometimes this structure is called the insular lobe. So that's an additional lobe which is sometimes described. Okay, there's a small part of the calcarine sulcus coming here, which is a continuation of the calcarine sulcus on the medial surface, which will be shown to you. So that's the calcarine sulcus you can see here. Lunate sulcus. It's right in front of the calcarine sulcus. That's the lunate. So these are the areas that you need to see and identify.